The Galactic Summit was a spectacle of unity, held aboard the sprawling Starlight Station that orbited the neutral planet, Viridia. Delegates from across the known universe streamed in, a parade of diversity and diplomatic potential. Among them was Xyrella, an officer of the Arcturian Command, her skin shimmering with the subtle glow of her species' famed luminescent markings. To her, this gathering was a mere formality, particularly when it came to the humans, whose inclusion in the council she openly doubted. Jack Hartley, a human delegate and astrophysicist, adjusted his translator device as he prepared to meet the various alien diplomats. His goal was simple: to secure a place for humanity in the Galactic Council. The hum of conversations filled the air, a testament to the galaxy's myriad voices and views. "Officer Xyrella, I presume?" Jack approached her with a hand extended, a smile playing on his lips. Xyrella looked down at the offered hand, her expression unreadable, then back at Jack. "I am. And you are?" "Jack Hartley. I represent Earth. It's an honor to meet a member of the Arcturian Command," he replied, maintaining his smile despite her cool demeanor. "Earth," Xyrella mused, her tone neutral. "A young race, yet eager. What makes you believe your species is ready to join the Council?" Jack's smile didn't waver. "We bring a unique perspective, officer. Humanity is resilient, inventive. We believe in cooperation and peace." "Ambitious," Xyrella commented dryly. "Yet, ambition is not synonymous with readiness." Before Jack could respond, a sudden alarm blared through the station. The delegates looked around in confusion as the station's AI announced a code-red situation. "This is a security alert. All delegates, please proceed to the nearest safe zone immediately," the automated voice instructed calmly. "What's happening?" Jack looked around, trying to gauge the situation. "Stay close," Xyrella commanded more than suggested, her previous reservations forgotten in the face of potential danger. Together, they moved towards the designated safe area, the crowd around them a mix of panic and disciplined order. As they walked, the station shook violently, lights flickering. "An attack," Jack wondered aloud, trying to stay upright. "Or a sabotage," Xyrella added, her eyes scanning their surroundings. "This summit has many enemies." Reaching the safe zone, they found themselves among a small group that included delegates from various systems, all sharing concerned glances and whispered speculations. Jack turned to Xyrella. "Whatever this is, we're in it together now. If there's any way my skills can be of use." "Your offer is noted," Xyrella interrupted, her gaze fixed on a terminal displaying the station's security feed. "But let's hope it will not come to that." As the station's security teams mobilized and the situation began to stabilize, Jack and Xyrella's initial forced cooperation turned into a cautious partnership. Despite her reservations, Xyrella found herself impressed by Jack's calm under pressure and his genuine desire to help. "Perhaps there is more to humanity than I assumed," Xyrella said quietly, watching Jack assist a fellow delegate from another system. Jack caught her gaze and nodded. "We have our moments," he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. As the emergency subsided, and the delegates were cleared to leave the safe zones, Xyrella looked at Jack with new eyes. Maybe this human could prove her initial judgments wrong after all. Chapter 2: The Rescue. The emergency had been declared a false alarm caused by a malfunctioning sensor, but the unease lingered in the air like a thick fog. The delegates slowly dispersed from the safe zones, conversations buzzing about potential sabotage and the security of the station. Jack and Xyrella walked side by side in an uneasy truce, heading back to the conference hall. Jack broke the silence, his voice carrying a mix of concern and curiosity. "That was an intense first meeting, huh? Not exactly the best first impression of a galactic summit." Xyrella glanced at him, her face impassive. "It was unfortunate, but it's not the first time a summit has been disrupted. The galaxy is not as unified as these events would have us believe." They reached the docking bay where Xyrella's shuttle was parked. She paused, inspecting her vessel. "I need to check my shuttle for any tampering. After today, one can't be too cautious." Jack nodded. "Mind if I join you?" I have some experience with Xenotech. Maybe I can help, if you're okay with that. Xyrella considered him for a moment before nodding curtly. Very well. But don't touch anything without my permission. Together, they entered the sleek shuttle. The interior was a blend of Arcturian elegance and advanced technology. Xyrella moved to the control panel, her fingers dancing over the holographic displays. Jack watched in fascination. Your tech is amazing. We have nothing like this on Earth. It serves its purpose, Xyrella replied, her attention on the diagnostics running across the screen. Suddenly, the shuttle lurched violently, throwing them both against the wall. What the? Jack managed to say, steadying himself. Someone has remotely accessed the shuttle's systems. Xyrella hissed, her voice tense. She quickly began countermeasures, her fingers a blur. Can I help? What do you need? Jack asked, moving closer to another control panel. Here, she pointed to a secondary console. Help me isolate the command module. Look for any unusual overrides or external signals. Working together, they traced the malicious code. Jack, despite his limited experience with alien tech, adapted quickly, guided by Xyrella's expert instructions. There, I think I've got it. This should cut off the external access, Jack said, his finger hovering over a critical command. Do it, Xyrella confirmed. Jack pressed the button, and the shuttle stabilized. Xyrella exhaled slowly, her gaze meeting Jack's. Well done, human. Jack smiled, rubbing the back of his neck. Jack, call me Jack. And it looks like we make a pretty good team. Xyrella didn't respond immediately, her eyes scanning the systems one last time before she turned to face him fully. Yes, Jack. It seems we do. As they exited the shuttle, the station's alarms ceased, and the normal hum of operations resumed. However, the incident had forged something new between them, a mutual respect that might just extend beyond the confines of the summit. Shall we head back to the conference? Jack asked, a hint of a smirk on his face. After you, Jack, Xyrella replied, a slight warmth in her voice that hadn't been there before. Together, they walked back towards the heart of the summit, their steps in sync, each lost in thoughts about the unexpected partnership that was beginning to form. Chapter 3, A Fragile Alliance. After the sabotage incident, the summit schedule resumed as planned, but the tension between delegates was palpable. The station's security protocols had been tightened, and more guards patrolled the halls. Jack found himself increasingly in the company of Xyrella, not by design, but by a growing sense of mutual necessity. Though she still maintained her aloof demeanor, she didn't push him away when he suggested they review her shuttle's security logs again. I've cross-checked everything twice, Xyrella said, her fingers sweeping across the holographic interface inside her ship's cockpit. The source of the attack is still untraceable. Whoever did this knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Jack peered over her shoulder, arms crossed. Maybe you're focusing too much on the software. What if the breach started from a hardware flaw? Something physical that gave them access. She tilted her head slightly, considering his suggestion. I would have noticed any alterations. The Arcturian engineering core doesn't leave vulnerabilities. Jack shrugged. No offense, but even the best systems have weak points. I mean, we humans have found a few backdoors into Arcturian tech over the years. Her sharp eyes narrowed at him. I'm sure you're proud of that, she said dryly. But if you have any specific insights, feel free to share them. He gave a small laugh. Not exactly what I meant, but okay. Let's start with the external modules. If there's a physical tap or relay device, we might find it there. Xyrella moved to a panel near the shuttle's main entrance, the glow of her markings dimming slightly as she worked. This conduit connects directly to the communication array. If there were a physical tap, it would need to be here. She hesitated, then glanced over her shoulder. Check the secondary output near the engine bay. I'll handle this side. Jack nodded and went to work, running his hand along the smooth surface of the panel before prying it open with a small tool he carried in his belt. You know, he called out as he inspected the wires. It's kind of funny. Back home, I used to tinker with starship systems on Earth. Never thought I'd be digging around inside an Arcturian ship. Am I supposed to feel honored? She replied without looking up. Maybe, Jack shot back, a grin tugging at his lips. I've always heard your ships are practically impenetrable. I guess even legends have their flaws. Zyrella's fingers paused mid-gesture. Impenetrable doesn't mean invincible. It means adaptable. And we adapt quickly. Fair enough, Jack said. And hey, if you're open to human suggestions, that's already a step forward. She gave a faint snort of amusement, subtle, but enough for Jack to catch. Don't read too much into it. You're still a long way from convincing me your species belongs in the Galactic Council. I'll take that as a challenge. They worked quietly for a while, Jack focusing on the wiring and Zyrella scanning the data relays. He could see the focus etched into her expression, and despite her earlier skepticism, he sensed she respected competence. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to respect his. After nearly an hour of searching, Jack finally found something. Hold on, he said, squinting at a small device nestled between two junction points. What's this? Zyrella turned sharply, crossing the cockpit in a fluid motion. What did you find? He stepped aside so she could see. It's small, but it's definitely not standard. Could be a relay someone placed here to piggyback on your communications. Her fingers hovered over the device before pulling back. If you're right, it means they had direct access to my ship before the summit even started. Looks that way, Jack confirmed. The question is, who and why? Zyrella straightened and looked Jack in the eye. We'll have to bring this to the station's security team. If they planted this, they could have done the same to other ships. Agreed, Jack said, brushing off his hands. But until we know for sure, you might want to keep a close eye on your systems. She nodded, and for the first time since they'd met, she looked at him without a hint of disdain. You're not entirely useless, Jack, he smirked. Is that a compliment? Don't let it go to your head, she replied, turning away. But he could swear there was the faintest hint of a smile as she walked back to the console. Their work was far from over. Whoever had planted the device was still out there, and the mystery would only deepen as they dug further. But in that moment, Jack realized they were no longer just two individuals forced to work together. They were a team, however fragile, bound by the shared goal of uncovering the truth. Chapter 4: The Hunted. The dense jungle-like environment of the planet stretched out before them, a labyrinth of twisting vines and massive, unfamiliar trees. Strange bird-like creatures chattered in the canopy, their calls echoing through the humid air. Zyrella and Jack pressed on, each step taking them deeper into the wilderness and further from the crash site. Jack wiped sweat from his brow and glanced over at Zyrella, who appeared unfazed by the heat. You ever get hot? Or is that just an Earth problem? Zyrella didn't slow her stride. Arcturian physiology is highly efficient. We adapt quickly to different climates. I'm more concerned about the increasing density of vegetation. It suggests we're nearing an area where predators might hunt. Jack stopped in his tracks and looked around. Predators? You mean those things making the weird screeching noises up there? She didn't turn back. No, those are harmless. I mean something more terrestrial. Large creatures that use the cover of the underbrush to ambush prey. Great, Jack muttered, jogging to catch up. So what's the plan if we run into one of these ambush predators? Zyrella shot him a sidelong glance. Don't get caught. That's reassuring, Jack said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Seriously, though, we need a plan. Maybe we can set up some sort of perimeter around our next campsite, some warning system so we're not completely blindsided. She considered his suggestion. We could use the shuttle's emergency supply pack. It includes motion sensors. They're not perfect, but they'll give us a few seconds warning if something large approaches. Jack nodded, relieved to have at least a semblance of a safety measure. Sounds good. Let's do that when we stop for the night. By the time the sun dipped below the treeline, they'd covered several kilometers. They found a relatively clear patch of ground beneath a massive umbrella-like tree. Jack dropped his pack with a sigh. Home sweet home. For tonight, Anyway, Zyrella began unpacking the emergency sensors without a word. Jack sat on a fallen log, catching his breath. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "you don't talk much about your world. What's it like?" Her hands stilled for a moment before she continued setting up the equipment. "Arcturia is orderly, efficient. Everything is designed with purpose." "That sounds nice," Jack said. "But doesn't it get boring? I mean, all work and no play." Zyrella looked at him, her glowing markings faintly illuminating the space between them. "We find satisfaction in structure and progress. Your kind seems to find satisfaction in chaos and improvisation." "Yeah, we do kind of wing it a lot," Jack admitted with a grin. "But sometimes that's what gets us through tough spots. Improvisation can mean survival." She regarded him thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but structure ensures stability." "Stability's great," Jack said, standing up to help set up the final sensor. "But sometimes, when you're out here in the wild, you have to think fast and take risks. Like now. If a predator shows up, I'll bet it's not going to wait for us to fill out a form or request backup." Zyrella's lips twitched into what could almost be called a smile. "You make a valid point." Just as they finished placing the last sensor, a sudden, low growl echoed from the shadows. Jack froze, his heart pounding. "Please tell me that was just the wind." Zyrella straightened, her hand instinctively going to the small blade at her side. "Stay calm," she said quietly. "Back away slowly. Whatever it is, we don't want to provoke it." The growl came again, closer this time. The creature stepped into the faint light from their campfire. A massive, feline-like predator with glowing eyes and a coat that seemed to shift colors in the darkness prowled toward them, its tail lashing. "Okay, new plan," Jack whispered. "We run." Zyrella shook her head. "Not yet. It's assessing us. If we panic, it will chase." Jack tightened his grip on a sturdy branch he had picked up earlier. "What's the alternative?" "Show it we're not easy prey," Zyrella said calmly. "Make yourself look bigger. Use that branch. I'll try to drive it back with sound." Jack followed her lead, raising his arms and the branch to appear larger. Zyrella began to emit a low, rhythmic hum, a sound that pulsed in waves and seemed to disorient the creature. The predator paused, its ears flattening against its skull. "Keep it up," Jack said, his voice shaking but determined. "It's backing off." The creature snarled one last time before slinking back into the shadows. Jack exhaled in relief and looked at Zyrella. "You just scared off a predator with your voice. That was incredible." Zyrella shrugged as if it were no big deal. "Arcturians have a natural harmonic resonance. It can be used for many purposes." Jack shook his head, still impressed. "Well, whatever you did, it worked. I owe you one." She tilted her head. "No, we worked together. Neither of us could have done it alone." They sat down by the fire, the tension slowly ebbing away. Jack broke the silence. "So, tell me more about that harmonic resonance of yours." And for the first time, Zyrella willingly shared a piece of her world. Her voice soft and steady as the fire crackled between them. Chapter 5, Under the Stars. The jungle thinned as they climbed higher into the rocky foothills, the air cooler and crisper. By the time night fell, the alien planet's twin moons illuminated a stunning plateau. Above them stretched a star-speckled sky like Jack had never seen before, alien constellations weaving unfamiliar patterns. Jack rolled his sore shoulders as he dropped their gear on the flat ground. "I don't care what galaxy you're from. This," he said, motioning to the sky, "is incredible." Zyrella, who was busy unpacking supplies, paused to glance upward. Her luminous markings dimmed slightly, a sign she was relaxed. "It is beautiful," she admitted. "I had not noticed." "How could you not notice?" Jack asked, settling down on a nearby rock. "You Arcturians just don't look up? Or what?" "We look up when we need to navigate," Zyrella replied matter-of-factly. "We do not gaze idly. Beauty, while appreciated, is not typically a priority." Jack shook his head. "Well, maybe you should make it one. I mean, isn't that what all this tech and exploration is for? To find places like this?" Xyrella considered his words as she secured the makeshift shelter. She finally sat across from him, the soft glow of her skin reflecting the moon's light. Do humans often pause their work simply to look at the stars? All the time, Jack said. When I was a kid, I'd lie on my roof back home for hours. Couldn't get enough of it. I guess. It reminded me that the universe is bigger than whatever little problem I was dealing with that day. An interesting perspective, Xyrella said. Arcturian children are taught to focus on solving those little problems directly, rather than seeking solace in the vastness of space. Jack smiled. Maybe that's why humans are so good at finding beauty in chaos. We don't just fixate on the problem, we look for the moments that make it all worthwhile. Like right now. Xyrella met his gaze, her luminous eyes unreadable. It's a different way of thinking, not one I had considered. For a while, they sat in silence, the gentle hum of nocturnal creatures their only company. Jack leaned back, hands clasped behind his head. You know, I think you're warming up to us humans. Xyrella arched an eyebrow. Because I allowed myself to look at the stars? No, Jack said, grinning. Because you're having a real conversation with me. I mean, you even smiled once or twice today. Admit it, we're growing on you. She didn't answer immediately, and when she finally spoke, her tone was more thoughtful than defensive. You have surprised me. I'll admit that. Your approach to problem-solving is unconventional. Your insistence on appreciating the moment is perplexing, yet is an eyebrow. Is that your way of saying you actually like working with me? I'm saying, Xyrella replied, her lips curving slightly, that you have proven more useful than I anticipated. I'll take that, Jack said, holding up his hands. Baby steps. The plateau grew quieter as the hours passed, their conversation ebbing into a companionable silence. Xyrella rested against a smooth rock, her eyes half closed. Jack noticed how her glow softened, becoming a faint shimmer under the moonlight. There was something peaceful about it. You look more relaxed now, he said softly. Guess even Arcturians need a break. We do not often allow ourselves such indulgences, Xyrella replied, her voice equally soft. But tonight, I do not mind. Jack hesitated, then took a chance. Do you ever wonder what it would be like to just let go of all the rules and expectations for a while? To just live in the moment? She opened her eyes fully and looked at him. I had not considered it before, but perhaps there is merit in the idea. Her gaze lingered on his for a moment longer than necessary, and Jack felt his pulse quicken. He leaned forward slightly, his tone dropping. Well, maybe you should give it a shot. Xyrella didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head, her luminous eyes studying him carefully. Perhaps I will, she said, her voice a whisper. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't spoken aloud. In that quiet, still moment under the twin moons and alien stars, they both leaned in. When their lips met, it was gentle at first, an unspoken understanding that neither of them was entirely sure what they were doing, but it felt right. When they finally pulled back, Xyrella's markings glowed a little brighter. Jack managed a small smile. Not bad for a human, right? Xyrella's lips curved into what might have been a smirk. Adequate? She said, her voice tinged with something close to warmth. They said no more, simply sitting under the stars, the uncharted territory between them not feeling so vast anymore. Chapter 6. Revelation. The ancient ruins loomed ahead, half hidden by the jungle's overgrowth. Jack and Xyrella had stumbled upon them while climbing higher into the mountains, and they now approached cautiously. The structure was immense. Smooth, dark stone etched with alien glyphs. Vines crawled over its surface, as if trying to pull it back into the wilderness. Jack wiped a bead of sweat from his brow and whistled low. This place has been here a while. You recognize any of these markings? Xyrella knelt near one of the carved pillars, her glowing eyes scanning the patterns. They appear to be pre-Arcturian, perhaps a remnant of a lost civilization. The language is unfamiliar, but the geometric style suggests a culture that valued logic and symmetry. Jack chuckled. So, definitely not human, then. She glanced at him. Your species' architectural accomplishments are different, less precise. I'll take that as a compliment, Jack said with a grin. He leaned closer to inspect the glyphs himself. These designs remind me of something I saw in an old Arcturian archive once. Could be related. Xyrella tilted her head. Interesting. Your access to Arcturian archives must be limited. How would you have seen? Classified project. Jack cut in. You know, a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. Her gaze lingered on him, but she didn't press further. Instead, she ran her fingers lightly over the carvings. Whoever built this place likely had advanced knowledge of material science. The structure shows no signs of erosion. Jack tapped the stone with his knuckle. Still solid. Whatever's inside is probably still intact. Xyrella stood and dusted off her hands. We should proceed with caution. If this site is significant, it may be guarded either by automated defenses or by scavengers. Scavengers like us? Jack teased. Her expression didn't change. We are not scavengers. We are investigators. Right? Investigators, Jack agreed. Lead the way, Investigator Xyrella. She rolled her eyes, at least it looked like she did, and stepped through the main archway. Inside, the air was cool and still. Faint light filtered through cracks in the ceiling, revealing a massive chamber filled with more glyph-covered pillars. At the center of the room stood a pedestal holding what looked like a small, glowing cube. Jack gestured to it. That looks important. Xyrella approached cautiously, her eyes narrowing. It may be a power core, or a data repository. Either way, its design is remarkable. Think it still works? I would not advise touching it, she said, her voice firm. Not until we understand its function. Jack stepped closer, stopping beside her. Okay, so we study it. Got it. Any chance this thing can tell us what happened here? Xyrella inspected the pedestal, her fingers tracing the edges. Possibly. If it contains a record of events, we might be able to access it by activating the glyphs in the correct sequence. You know how to do that? Jack asked, curious. I can make an educated guess, she replied, her focus on the cube. Arcturian scholars have studied similar devices. Jack crossed his arms, watching as she worked. So, what do you think happened to the people who built this place? Did they just vanish? It is possible they migrated or were assimilated by another civilization, Xyrella said. Or perhaps they simply ended. Jack frowned. Ended? That's a pretty grim way to put it. Not every civilization endures forever, she said simply. Jack rubbed the back of his neck. Still, it's weird. A place this advanced, you'd think there'd be more evidence of what happened. Like, I don't know, records, artifacts, bodies. Xyrella's eyes flicked to the cube. This may be the only record left. If we can decipher it, we may find answers. They worked together, Jack carefully following Xyrella's instructions as she guided him through the sequence of glyph activations. With each symbol they pressed, the cube's glow shifted, pulsing brighter and brighter until, finally, it emitted a soft hum. Looks like it's doing something, Jack said. Xyrella nodded, her gaze fixed on the cube. If it's functioning, it may project an image or... Before she could finish, the cube sent a faint beam of light into the air above it. The beam expanded into a holographic display, showing a detailed map of the surrounding region. Glyphs scrolled alongside it, as if recounting events. Whoa! Jack breathed. What is all this? Xyrella leaned closer, reading the glyphs. It's a log. It describes the construction of this site and the purpose it served. It appears to have been a repository for knowledge and a refuge. A refuge from what? I do not know yet. The glyphs are complex. Give me a moment. Jack waited patiently, his eyes scanning the holographic map. Does it mention any other sites like this? Possibly, Xyrella said, her voice distracted. But it also mentions an anomaly, something that may have caused the builders to abandon this place. An anomaly? Jack stepped closer. Like a natural disaster? Or something worse? Xyrella didn't answer immediately, her focus intent on the glyphs. Finally, She straightened and looked at Jack. Whatever it was, it forced them to leave. But there's no description of what happened after. The log ends abruptly. Jack frowned. So, we have more questions than answers. Great. It's a start, Zyrella said. And it may lead us to something greater. If we can locate another site. She stopped mid-sentence as the hologram shifted, highlighting a distant point on the map. Jack looked at her. Does that mean what I think it means? Zyrella nodded. Another site, and perhaps more information. Jack grinned. Looks like we've got our next destination. For the first time since they'd started their journey together, Zyrella allowed herself a small smile. Indeed. Chapter 7, The Battle of Wits. The day's trek had been exhausting. The map they'd recovered from the ancient ruins led them to a series of winding canyons flanked by jagged cliffs. Jack and Zyrella stopped to rest under the overhang of a weathered rock formation. Both were aware of how exposed they were in the narrow pass, but their supplies were running low, and they needed to regroup. Jack took a swig of water from his canteen, his gaze scanning the cliff edges. You ever get the feeling we're being watched? He asked. Zyrella, who was examining her handheld scanner, raised an eyebrow. You're becoming paranoid. Maybe. Or maybe it's because every time I felt like this before, something bad happened, Jack replied. He set the canteen down and adjusted the strap on his shoulder pack. Call it a human survival instinct. I will call it what it is, paranoia, Zyrella said flatly. She put the scanner away. If there is a threat, it is best we continue moving. Staying still only increases our vulnerability. Jack got to his feet, his muscles protesting. Fair enough. Lead the way, Commander. She gave him a side glance but didn't comment. They moved cautiously through the canyon, the narrow walls creating a natural funnel that amplified every sound. Jack kept his senses alert, noting the crunch of gravel beneath their boots and the faint rustle of the wind above them. Your people have a saying, Zyrella said after a long silence. Speak softly and carry a big stick. I believe that applies here. Jack snorted. It's more about diplomacy, not hiking through a canyon. Nevertheless, it is a sound strategy, Zyrella replied, her voice steady. Though in this case, your stick may be more literal. Jack tapped the sturdy walking staff he'd picked up earlier. Good thing I'm prepared. They rounded a corner in the canyon, and Jack immediately froze. A group of figures stood at the far end of the pass, humanoid but clearly not human. They were clad in patchwork armor, and the metallic gleam of weapons in their hands caught the afternoon light. Company, Jack muttered. Zyrella's hand moved instinctively to the blade at her side. She didn't speak, but her posture shifted, her body tense and ready. One of the figures stepped forward. His voice echoed against the canyon walls. This pass is closed. Turn around. Jack raised his hands in a gesture of non-aggression. We're just passing through. No trouble. Too late for that, the figure replied. He gestured, and his companions began moving to encircle them. Zyrella's voice was calm but firm. Stand down. We are not here to fight. Not up to you, the lead figure said. Leave everything you're carrying, and maybe we'll let you go. Jack glanced at Zyrella. What's the plan, Commander? She didn't take her eyes off their would-be attackers. We outnumbered them before, she said under her breath. By 3. Well, I don't suppose you have another one of those harmonic resonance tricks up your sleeve? No, but we can use the terrain, she replied. Follow my lead. Jack nodded, gripping his makeshift staff. He wasn't sure what Zyrella had in mind, but he trusted her enough to go along with it. Zyrella stepped forward, raising one hand. You'll regret this, she said, her voice low and commanding. I suggest you stand aside before it's too late. The leader laughed. And what are you going to do? She smiled just barely, and then dropped a small device onto the ground. A split second later, a brilliant flash of light erupted, momentarily blinding their attackers. Jack didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, using his staff to knock the nearest weapon out of an opponent's hand. Move! Zyrella shouted, already running for a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. Jack followed, dodging the dazed attackers' clumsy swings. They squeezed through the crevice, emerging into a side ravine that offered more cover. "Nice trick," Jack said as they scrambled over rocks. "Where'd you get that thing?" "It was in the emergency kit," Xyrella replied. "A simple photonic grenade." "Remind me to stock up on those," Jack muttered. The canyon walls widened ahead, giving them a bit more breathing room. Xyrella stopped, her eyes scanning their surroundings. "They'll recover quickly. We need to find higher ground." Jack pointed to a steep slope leading up to a ridge. "How about that? If we can get up there, we'll have the advantage." Xyrella nodded. "Agreed. Let's move." They climbed the slope quickly but carefully. The sound of their pursuers grew louder behind them, shouts and footsteps echoing through the canyon. Jack and Xyrella reached the top, where they found a natural choke point, a narrow gap between two large boulders. "This will do," Xyrella said. "We'll hold them here." "Hold them? You mean fight them off?" Jack asked, his grip tightening on the staff. "Only if necessary," she replied. "But we may be able to scare them off with another display." "What kind of display?" Xyrella picked up a handful of loose rocks and held them in her palm. She closed her eyes, focusing. The faint glow of her markings brightened, and a low hum resonated from her body. The rocks began to vibrate, and a second later, they shot forward with surprising force, ricocheting off the canyon walls with loud cracks. Jack's eyes widened. "Okay, that was impressive." The echoes reverberated through the canyon, creating an unsettling cacophony. Their pursuers, who had just rounded the corner, paused at the sound. The leader hesitated, his weapon raised, but his uncertainty was evident. "This is your last warning," Xyrella said, her voice carrying an edge that made even Jack stand a little straighter. "Leave now or face the consequences." For a moment, the attackers seemed ready to charge. But then the leader signaled for them to retreat. They backed away slowly, disappearing into the shadows. Jack let out a long breath. "Well, that worked." Xyrella's glow dimmed as she lowered her hand. It was a calculated risk, but effective. Jack leaned on his staff, shaking his head in admiration. "I'll say, you just scared off a bunch of armed scavengers with some glowing rocks and a glare." Xyrella gave him a faint smile. "Sometimes, perception is as powerful as action." Jack laughed softly, clapping her lightly on the shoulder. "Well, Commander, I think I'm starting to like having you on my side." They stood on the ridge for a moment longer, catching their breath and scanning the horizon. The danger had passed, for now, but the path ahead remained uncertain. At least Jack thought they were in it together. Chapter 8. Rescued and Changed. It had taken them nearly 2 weeks to traverse the alien wilderness and reach the coordinates marked on the holographic map. Jack and Xyrella stood on a cliff overlooking a wide valley, and there it was, another ancient structure, nearly identical to the one where they'd first found the glowing cube. This one, however, showed no signs of looting or damage. It rose from the earth like a forgotten sentinel, its stone surface catching the pale light of the planet's twin moons. Jack wiped his forehead and glanced at Xyrella. "That's it, huh?" "It appears so," Xyrella said, her voice calm as always. "Though I expect it will be equally enigmatic." Jack smirked. "If it were easy, it wouldn't be any fun." "I fail to see how a journey filled with danger and uncertainty qualifies as fun," Xyrella replied. But there was a hint of amusement in her tone, something that, weeks ago, Jack wouldn't have expected to hear. They began descending into the valley. The air was cooler here, and the terrain less treacherous. The building grew larger as they approached, its intricate carvings and towering pillars becoming clearer. Jack noticed that the structure was slightly different. The glyphs glowed faintly, as if some hidden energy source still powered them. "You seeing this?" Jack asked, pointing to the light. "Yes," Xyrella said, her eyes narrowing. "It is operational." They stopped a few feet from the entrance. Jack looked at her. "Any chance we trigger another light show if we go inside?" "Quite possibly," she said. "But we must proceed cautiously. If this facility is functional, it may contain active defense systems." Well, here's hoping we don't run into anything too unfriendly, Jack muttered. Xyrella didn't respond. She moved forward, her every step measured, her gaze darting across the structure as if looking for traps. Jack followed, gripping his staff a little tighter. The air grew cooler as they passed under the archway. The chamber inside was immense, much larger than the first ruins they'd encountered. At the center, another pedestal stood, but this one held not a cube, but a tall obelisk that pulsed with light. Xyrella approached the pedestal and began examining the glyphs etched around its base. It appears to be a repository of information, perhaps more comprehensive than the cube. Think it can tell us who built this place? Jack asked, standing at her side. Perhaps, Xyrella replied, her fingers tracing the symbols. I will attempt to interface with it. Stand back. Jack took a few steps back, watching as Xyrella placed her hand on the obelisk. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the light within the obelisk intensified, and a series of holographic projections filled the air above them. Jack's jaw dropped as he saw images of a vast, highly advanced civilization. Ships the size of cities, gleaming structures that defied gravity, and a network of planets interconnected by beams of energy. That's incredible, Jack whispered. Xyrella's expression remained focused. These are records. They tell of a civilization known as the Orani. They were architects of knowledge, spreading their findings across countless worlds. What happened to them? Jack asked, stepping closer. Xyrella frowned. It's unclear. The projections stop abruptly. Jack crossed his arms, his mind racing. So they just vanished? Possibly, Xyrella said. But their legacy remains. She gestured to the glowing obelisk. This repository contains a vast trove of their knowledge, scientific data, cultural records, technological schematics. Jack let out a low whistle. And we just stumbled on it. It would seem so, Xyrella said, her voice tinged with awe. This site is more than I could have hoped to find. Jack looked at her. And what now? You gonna upload all of this to the Arcturian Council? Eventually, Xyrella replied. But for now, we need to ensure it is properly secured. This information is too valuable to risk losing or falling into the wrong hands. Jack nodded. Makes sense. They spent the next few hours exploring the chamber, cataloging what they could. Xyrella worked tirelessly, her movements efficient and deliberate. Jack pitched in where he could, often asking questions and marveling at the projections. As the night wore on, they paused for a moment to rest. Jack leaned against a pillar and glanced at Xyrella. You know, you've changed since I first met you. Xyrella raised an eyebrow. How so? When we first started this trip, you barely tolerated me, Jack said with a small smile. Now you're actually letting me help. She tilted her head, her markings glowing faintly. You've proven yourself capable, Jack. And I have come to appreciate your perspective, your curiosity, your improvisation. It's not something we Arcturians value highly, but I can see its merit. Wow, Jack said, grinning. That almost sounded like a compliment. Xyrella gave a faint smile in return. Do not let it go to your head. Jack laughed softly.